Alan Fisher and his brother Robert had always seemed like the perfect duo. Successful, respected, and admired by everyone around them. But behind their impeccable public facades lay a dark secret. But as they closed in on Alan, they soon realized that the true villain was still out there, clipping through their fingers. A ghost in the shadows, and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. It was a bright, crisp morning in the city, but on that fateful day, everything was about to change. Something the thieves had been planning for months. They knew the bank inside and out, the security protocols, the timing of shifts, the blind spots in the surveillance system. They had studied the staff, monitored the bank's daily operations, and even gone so far as to learn the patterns of the city's law enforcement. They were professional, and the heist they were about to carry out would be like nothing. As the clock struck 2 p.m., the usual mid-afternoon rush of customers began to fill the lobby. At that moment, the group of thieves made their move. They entered the bank in pairs, blending in with the ordinary crowd. Dressed in plain clothes, they did not raise any suspicion as they moved towards their respective positions. One of them, posing as a businessman, walked casually past the security guard, exchanging a farewell. He then made his way to the manager's office, where the vault codes were kept hidden. Another thief, posing as a delivery man, wheeled in a cart of supplies, setting the stage for what was to come. The other members of the group, positioned in key locations throughout the bank, quietly disabled the security cameras. Within moments, the pristine white walls, once lined with the watchful eyes of hidden surveillance, were blank. They moved with precision, knowing exactly where to go, what to do, and how to get in and out without a trace. In the vault room, the real operation began. With access to the vault codes and the system now compromised, the thieves quickly emptied the bank's safety deposit boxes. The piles gave, though he explained that invigoration of floodlights to turn to hit his property. By the time the police arrived, the thieves were long gone, having slipped away through a hidden back door that led to an alley behind the bank. They had taken millions in cash, along with priceless artifacts, and left behind not a single clue, no fingerprint, no evidence. The police were baffled. No eyewitnesses had come forward, and the few people who were in the lobby during the heist were either too scared to speak or too confused to remember anything useful. The security footage was wiped clean, and the vault's locks showed no signs of tampering. The criminals had disappeared without a trace, leaving the authorities with nothing but thoughts of an unanswered question. The heist, which had been executed so flawlessly, was not just a robbery. It was a statement. Whoever had done this had made sure that no one would ever forget the day the city's most secure bank was robbed. Days passed, but the city remained on edge. The thieves had vanished without leaving a single piece of evidence behind. No fingerprints, no footprints, no surveillance footage. The heist seemed like a ghost operation, an untraceable crime carried out by professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Despite the flawless execution of the robbery, the police refused to give up. They combed through the bank's security records looking for anything that could hint at the identity of the criminals. Hours turned into days, and just when it seemed like the investigation was hitting a dead end, a small, almost invisible clue surfaced. It was a fingerprint. But not just any fingerprint. A single, faint print found on the edge of the desk in the manager's office. The desk had been untouched during the heist, and the fingerprint wasn't. The authorities were quick to send the print off for analysis, hoping that it might lead them somewhere. But this was no ordinary fingerprint. It wasn't just another random print left by a careless thief. It was clean, precise, and pointed towards someone who had been in the city just a few weeks before the robbery. The fingerprint didn't match any of the usual suspects. It wasn't tied to anyone with a criminal record, and there were no known. After weeks of digging into every possible lead, the fingerprint was eventually tied to an unlikely source. A man named Alan Fisher, a private investigator who had been working on an unrelated case in the same city just months before the robbery. Curiously, Fisher had been conducting his own investigation into a missing persons case just a few months earlier, one that seemed unrelated to the bank robbery. But the deeper the authorities dug into his background, the more they found that his case intersected with the same network of criminals that the police were now investigating. Fisher, they discovered, had been gathering intelligence on powerful individuals and organizations, though his connections remained. The more the police learned about him, the more they realized that this fingerprint was only the first piece of a much larger puzzle. The police were left with more questions than answers. Fisher had connections that ran deep, far deeper than they initially suspected. His involvement in the investigation had remained a mystery. But one thing was clear. The stolen money resulted. The criminal syndicate responsible for the heist was larger, more intricate, and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The hunt for the truth had only just begun. The investigation into the robbery continued to unravel in ways that no one could have predicted. The stolen money from the Central National Bank heist was carefully laundered through a complex web of illegal channels. At first, the money would be scattered across multiple churches. It wasn't just about stealing the money. It was about using it to fund something much larger. The police started to focus on the financial transactions connected to the robbery. The stolen cash had been moved swiftly, almost as if the criminals had anticipated every step of the investigation. Tracing the money's movement, they'd found that a large sum had passed through a series of fake companies. These companies, established with fake identities and false addresses, had acted as mere facades, designed to give the appearance of legitimate businesses while funneling the stolen cash through various accounts. But one particular account stood out, a holding company that had been registered just days before the robbery. It was linked to a chain of anonymous transactions that led to an upscale ocean mansion on the outskirts of the city. On paper, the mansion belonged to a wealthy entrepreneur who had made his fortune through some code. His public image was that of a philanthropist, a man who had made it his life's work to give back to the community. However, the deeper the investigators dug into his finances, the more suspicious things became. The money from the robbery was flowing directly into his accounts. Large, unexplained deposits appeared, all linked to the shell companies that had first handled the stolen cash. As the authorities worked their way through his financial records, they began to piece together a shocking reality. The wealthy philanthropist was not just a passive recipient of the stolen money. He was an active player in the crime. The authorities traced the flow of the stolen funds all the way back to him. His mansion, with its sprawling grounds and expensive cars, was not just a symbol of wealth. It was a front for something much darker. The philanthropist had involved in planning Heist, a so-called charity which had received millions in donations over the years, was simply another tool in his vast criminal network. As investigators pieced the puzzle together, it became clear that this was no ordinary robbery. The philanthropist had orchestrated a series of high-profile heists over the years, using his legitimate businesses as a cover for laundering the stolen money. The philanthropist's involvement in the robbery was just the beginning of a much larger investigation. As the authorities zeroed in on him, they realized the true scope of his criminal activities, but they also realized that the criminals they were chasing had already planned for every move they would make. As the investigation into the stolen money continued, the authorities began to see the complexity of the operation they were up against. The philanthropist, once regarded as a model citizen, had been exposed as the mastermind behind a series of heists. His public persona as a generous businessman with nothing more than a well-crafted lie, a mask that had hid its revelation. But even with this revelation, the case had only begun. The more investigators dug, the more they realized they were dealing with an intricate web of corruption and deceit. The philanthropist had long been suspected of shady dealings, but no one had ever been able to connect him to anything concrete. His charity work, his investments, and his public appearances had all served as a shield, protecting him from scrutiny. However, now that the authorities were closing in on him, they began to uncover a far more. He had been using his legitimate business ventures as fronts for a much larger criminal syndicate, one that spanned multiple countries and involved a network of highly skilled thieves, money launderers, and corrupt. The stolen funds from the bank heist had been just a small part of the larger scheme. As investigators pieced together the stolen money's journey, they discovered a shocking truth. The philanthropist was not working alone. He had been part of a much larger syndicate that orchestrated high-profile robberies across the globe, using his business empires on front to launder the money. The authorities began to follow the money trail, which led them to several shell companies and false identities, all connected to the philanthropist's vast criminal network. But the deeper the investigation went, the more dangerous it became. The syndicate had long anticipated law enforcement's moves, and they had set up an elaborate system of decoys and misdirections. The more the police uncovered, the more they realized that they were dealing with an organization that had eyes and ears everywhere, even some of the most trusted members of the law enforcement. As the investigation stretched on, it became clear that the organization was only the tip of the iceberg. The syndicate's true leader, a shadow figure with deep ties to organized crime, had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The philanthropist had been working for this figure all along, unknowingly playing a part in a much larger operation. He had been promised a share of the profits, which he used to maintain his lavish lifestyle and continue his public charade as a philanthropist. But now that the authorities were closing in on him, he was starting to crack. In a desperate move, the philanthropist attempted to flee the country, abandoning his mansion, his charity, and everything he had built over the years. He tried to make his way to a private jet that would take him to a safe haven, but the authorities were already one step ahead. They had anticipated his flight and set up a sting operation at the airport. As he tried to board the jet, he was arrested. However, even in prison, the philanthropist refused to cooperate. As the philanthropist's arrest made headlines across the country, the police were already turning their attention to the deeper layers of the criminal organization. But one thing was certain: the unraveling of this massive conspiracy had only this. The arrest of the philanthropist seemed like a victory for the police. The investigation had gone on for months, and after all the twists and turns, it appeared that they had finally caught the man behind the heist and the massive criminal network. But the case was far from over. As authorities interrogated the philanthropist, it became clear that there were far more secrets buried beneath. He remained tight-lipped, refusing to divulge the names of his associates or reveal how deep the operation truly ran. He acted as if he was still in control, confident that his role in the syndicate would remain protected. The police were frustrated. They had spent so much time and effort tracking down leads, following the money, and infiltrating a whirl of corruption that seemed endless. It began with a leak. The philanthropist's arrest had drawn attention from multiple news outlets, and as the story spread, an anonymous source contacted a local journalist with a bombshell. The philanthropist's brother, a businessman with a similar public image, had been the true leader of the criminal syndicate all along. The revelation was shocking, to say the least. The philanthropist, it seemed, had been a mere puppet in his brother's larger scheme. While he ran a network of fake charities and show companies, his brother had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, coordinating heists, underweight money, and managing the most criminal empire. The two brothers had operating in tandem, each playing the philanthropist's public image had allowed his brother to stay in the shadows unnoticed by the authority. Police, stunned by the discovery, quickly shifted their focus to the philanthropist's brother. But it was too late. He had vanished. No one knew where he had gone or how he had managed to slip away so cleanly. It was as if he had anticipated the moment when his brother's arrest would expose him, and he had planned his escape well. With no trace of the brother and no way to track his movements, the investigation entered a new phase. The police scoured the criminal underworld, following any lead that might lead them to him, but the trail was cold. The brother had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a tangled web of what had begun as a high-profile bank robbery had turned into a global manhunt for a criminal empire that spanned countries and continents. The brothers had been the public, but as the final twist played out, it was clear that the hunt for the brother would not be as simple as they had hoped.